Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to a video that I have catchily titled the $100 Rolex Daytona Alternative. Now, if we're being honest with each other, we both know that $100 will not buy you a Rolex Daytona Alternative. However, it will buy you something that looks a lot like a Rolex Daytona and fulfills the exact same purpose as a Rolex Daytona, i.e. it tells the time and has a chronograph function. Now, I have reviewed the Pagani lookalike, which is a one-for-one copy but with a different brand name on the dial essentially. Today it's something different. It's a watch that isn't a one-for-one copy and has a brand name on the dial that I'm sure you will all be familiar with. That brand name is Seiko. Now, Seiko make a bunch of chronographs, some of which, if you have a few shots and then squint, you could probably argue bear some resemblance to a Daytona, but this one I think gets closer than any of them, and the thumbnail wasn't a lie. It's less than $100. There are a couple of catches though. I mean, come on. I'll discuss those a little later in the video. But first of all, I have to say thank you to a man whose name I'm sure you're all familiar with by now. A man who buys so many watches he really should start his own channel. Gary from Birmingham. When I met Gary a couple of years ago, he had a 6-watch box and a strict one in, one out policy. But that was then, and this is now. This is the second watch I have looked at of his in the last 2 weeks. Thank you again, Gary. What has he been buying this time? Let's flip the camera and find out. Alright then, so under $100 with a nod to the Rolex Daytona, but made by Seiko. Intriguing, I'm sure you'll agree. I did say there were a couple of catches, a couple of caveats though. I'll discuss the first of them when I discuss the price. This is a JDM, Japanese domestic market only model. It's the SBTQ045 from Seiko's Spirit range of chronographs. That means that if you want one of these, you are buying it from Japan. It's not a hard watch to find though. I'll leave a few links in the description of the video, but as you can see, prices vary wildly from $85 US all the way up to about $185 US. So choose carefully. Like I said, it's not rare or anything, so don't pay a premium for it if you do decide to pick up one of these. I've reviewed an increasing number of JDM watches this year. It really seems that a lot of the good stuff that's made in Japan ends up staying in Japan, whether it's by Casio, by Citizen, or now by Seiko. Now, JDM means that the best you can hope for is a 1-year international warranty, and obviously, if you have to make a claim, this watch is going back to the land of the rising sun, which is not exactly convenient, is it? But at the end of the day, it's a quartz Seiko chronograph. I think that the worst that could happen is that you need to replace a battery, and that is easy to do. They are pretty reliable units, and there it is. And you see what I mean? It definitely bears a passing resemblance to a Rolex Daytona, but it's not trying to fool anybody into thinking that it actually is a Rolex Daytona. They never did a burgundy dial for a start, or at least not a regular one. There were a few specials made with diamonds all over the dial, costing thousands upon thousands of dollars, no doubt, but there was never a burgundy dial steel Daytona, so it's not a one-for-one. And I guess the second caveat kicks in at this point. It's a bit smaller than a Daytona. This one is 38.5 millimeters in diameter, whereas the Rolex is 40 mil, so 1.5 mil bigger. The Rolex does wear quite small for a 40, I think, but yeah, it's a little bit bigger than this one. Because this one's quartz though, it's slim. It's only 9.6 mil thick and has a really compact and wearable 45 mil lug tip to lug tip. Lug width, however, is 20 mil, meaning strap changes super easy. You're likely to have more 20s in your box than 18s, I would imagine. There's a bit of taper down to 18 and back up to 20 at the clasp. Sized up for me, not for Gary. Gary brought this one to me on a sailcloth. I swapped it over for the standard bracelet. It weighs in at a svelte 96 grams. So stainless steel case, crown, fixed stainless steel bezel, and steel pushers. And it really is that fixed stainless steel bezel, isn't it, that gives this watch its Daytona look-alike credentials with that tachymeter bezel scale etched in there. Now that is a flat hard Lex crystal, so it's Seiko's own mineral crystal. AR, I don't think so. That means you need to be a little bit more careful with it, because if you treat it roughly, it will scratch, it will scuff. But you do get a decent 100 meters of water resistance, which is exactly the same as you get from the Rolex. The bracelet is also stainless steel, but to be honest, I'm not sure how much stainless steel was used in its construction. Hollow end links, and all of those links are pressed and then rolled. The clasp is also pressed, and it is cheap. It is rattly, though to give it its dues, I mean, look at the flex, look at the gaps between those links. To give it some credit though, it hasn't taken a hair off my arm yet, and I have been wearing this one all day, so here's hoping. Case back is screw on rather than press on. Perhaps that's where some of the surprising 100 meters of water resistance comes from. Very simple, just the usual basic information printed around the outside. The movement is a Seiko Module 7T92 quartz chronograph caliber. Features a date at 3, small second register at 9, and 2 chronograph sub-dials at the 12 and the 6. One push of the top pusher sets that central chrono hand running. One push of the top pusher to stop, one push of the bottom pusher to reset. However, if you forget to stop it, it will carry on running for 12 hours. This is a 12-hour chronograph. There are actually 2 hands on that bottom sub-dial. A longer one for minutes, a smaller one which you're then obliged to work into hours. It does laps. You can then stop and reset it. Stop and carry on, stop and carry on. You can do laps and then press the lap again. It'll catch up with itself. You can also time 2 competitors if you so choose, all down to 1/20th of a second with the aid of that top register. All very impressive. Battery should last around 3 years, and it has the standard quartz stated tolerances of plus or minus 15 seconds per month. Now, we've already had a bit of a look at the dial, but let's chuck in a few outdoor macro shots at this point. Most of the markings are just printed on, including the brand name, the rather unnecessary printing of chronograph because it's quite obvious, and the water resistance rating next to the date. All markings for the sub-registers are just printed flat. They aren't actually recessed. There are small loop plots applied at the 3, 6, 9 and 12, but there are 8 rectangular applied baton indices everywhere else. All hands are high polished silver. The hour and minute hand are beveled down the middle. They are pretty small though, so if your eyes aren't quite what they used to be, perhaps this isn't the watch for you, to be honest. There is quite a thick and deep chapter ring printed with 5-minute numerals. Like the dial, it's in burgundy, and the whole watch has quite a glitzy sunburst effect. Overall, looks neat and tidy. It's pretty good. They even managed to squeeze a bit of lume onto the 2 main hands and all the hour markers. Just a bit though. By the time I get to 10 minutes of my test, it's struggling. By the time I get to the end, all you're left with are the 4 points of the compass and the hour hand. Oh well. And on wrist, it's surprisingly nice. It's small, it's neat, it's light, it's compact, but the stainless steel bezel and that unusual burgundy colour combined with the sunburst effect still gives it a decent amount of presence, I think. Short lug to lug, it sits flat on the wrist, it's pretty light. I think therefore this one has unisex appeal, but the bracelet, yeah, not up to much. Massive gaps. As pointed out earlier on, you can see quite a lot of your arm beneath it, and that clasp redefines the term basic. But it's easily swapped out for a bit of brown vintage leather, some nice warm tones. Now, Gary had it on sailcloth, I guess, to take advantage of the 100 meters of water resistance. This clearly does not do that, but I think leather suits that burgundy dial nicely. But as discussed, those hands are too small for this one to be classed truly as legible, I think. Moans and niggles, they should all be self-evident by now. They would probably sell more if it was 40mm in diameter, they would probably sell more if the bracelet was higher quality, and they would probably sell more if it was sold outside of Japan. But Gary always seems to have an eye for an interesting watch. He keeps turning up with these little nuggets, and every watch has a bit of a backstory. Every watch makes its own case to hang around in his collection, at least for a little while. It may not quite be built like a Rolex Daytona, but for most of us mere mortals, it's a damn sight more accessible these days than a Daytona or anything else from the Big R. So there you have it, a sweet little watch if you're not into the AliExpress lookalikes, but you want something that still nods in the direction of Rolex. Now, JDM is a double-edged sword because it's harder to buy and harder to repair if you have a problem with it. and you'll be paying more for postage, but you're far less likely to see the same watch on someone else's wrist as a consequence. If this one didn't float your boat, you probably should check out the Pagani. It's one of their best and it's much better spec'd than this Seiko. Or why not check out a Casio that this time nods not towards Rolex, but to Omega and their Aquaterra range instead. Thanks for watching, see you all again in a future video.